The table in front of me seemed like a cruel irony of fate. The dinner, meticulously prepared with glasses of wine and lit candles, was the perfect setting for a betrayal exposed in its rawest form. My wife was there, next to another man, and her wide eyes as I placed my wedding ring on the table were a vivid painting of shock and despair. "Are you sure about this?" she asked with a trembling voice, as if there was still a chance of redemption. But I didn't answer with words. My answer was the spit that flew through the air and fell between them. And, without looking back, I walked away. The world seemed to spin in slow motion as I left that restaurant. Every step was charged with a mixture of anger, humiliation and a sadness that seemed to consume every part of me. The memory of her smiling, the same one I once thought was mine alone, was now marked by an unbearable betrayal. How could she? How could someone to whom I entrusted my life, with whom I shared dreams, dare to break everything with such cruelty? My mind was racing with questions that had no answers, and my heart was torn between the desire to confront them again and the need to escape to a place where I could breathe. Meanwhile, inside the restaurant, she was desperately trying to put together the pieces of the scene I had just destroyed. "Does he know?" she asked her lover, her voice trembling and her face pale. The man, confused and clumsy, mumbled something about keeping calm. But it was too late. The illusion of control she believed she had crumbled. The lies told, the lame excuses, the nights when she claimed to be with friends, everything had been uncovered. And above all, she now had to deal with the reality that that dinner, which was supposed to be the culmination of her silent betrayal, had become the beginning of her nightmare. In the car, my mind revisited the last few months with painful clarity. Small details that I had ignored, signs that now seemed obvious. The messages she hid, the cell phone that was always turned down, the unexpected meetings that came up with no plausible explanation. I reproached myself for not noticing before. But at the same time, I realized that it wasn't just blindness on my part. It was trust. A trust that was now shattered, scattered in pieces on the floor of that restaurant. "Why didn't you tell me before?" my sister asked hours later, while I was letting off steam. "I wasn't sure," I replied, still struggling to accept reality. But the truth was that I did know, on some level. There's always something inside us that senses when we're being betrayed. It's an intuition, a persistent nagging that we try to ignore because the truth hurts more than any doubt. And now, confronted with that truth, there was no running away from it. On the other side, she was panicking. The mask she wore to hide her double life had fallen, and the consequences were beginning to form like the clouds of an impending storm. Her lover, who until then had seemed like a safe haven, was now showing his true face. He didn't want any complications, let alone to face the wrath of a betrayed husband. "I didn't get involved for this," he said angrily, as he put on his coat to leave. And so, within minutes, she found herself alone. The man she had risked everything for was as fragile as the lies she had told. The silence that filled the house that night was deafening. Every corner seemed to echo memories that now had a different weight. The photo album on the shelf, the presents we exchanged on birthdays and special dates, even the simple decoration in the living room, everything seemed to mock me. She didn't come home that night, and that was proof enough that she knew what was coming. The next day, while I was starting to think about the next steps, she tried to call me. I rejected the calls. Not because I didn't want to hear what she had to say, but because I knew that nothing she could say could erase what had happened. However, the messages started to arrive. Long texts full of apologies, regrets and pleas for a chance to talk. Each message was a stab, a reminder that the love I once thought was unshakable was now in ruins. "Please find me," said the last message. Against all my intentions, I accepted. Not because I wanted to reconcile, but because I needed to understand. I needed to hear from her why. And when we met, her expression was a mixture of guilt and despair. "I made a mistake," she began, but her words sounded empty, rehearsed. "A mistake?" I interrupted, unable to contain my indignation. You call it a mistake to destroy years of trust for a ridiculous adventure. She tried to justify herself, but every word only increased my anger. Her betrayal wasn't just a choice, it was a reflection of something much deeper. A lack of respect, a silent abandonment of everything we had built together. And when I asked her if she thought we could move on after that, her hesitation was the clearest answer I could receive. Meanwhile, the lover was facing his own consequences. He was a man used to living on the margins, not caring about the lives he destroyed in the process. But this time, he had underestimated the power of an exposed truth. People around him started asking questions, and his name was tarnished by rumors that spread like wildfire. His own social circle, which had once supported him, now turned away, leaving him alone to deal with the mess he had caused. But even in the midst of the chaos, there was one question echoing in my mind: what would come next? I knew that the betrayal was just the beginning of a series of twists and turns that would change not only my life, but hers and her lover's as well. Because, after all, no one comes out of a betrayal unscathed. And as I faced the future, one thing was certain: this story was far from over. Welcome to the channel, where intense and emotional stories come to life. Here, we never support any kind of betrayal. On the contrary, the fictional narratives you'll hear are a powerful warning about how betrayal can destroy lives, break bonds, and leave deep scars. Get ready to dive into a shocking story, full of twists and turns, that will hold your attention from start to finish. Enjoy the story and hold on, because the impact is guaranteed. Lucas had always been a methodical man, one of those with an almost immutable routine. He worked as a civil engineer for a well-established company, but it wasn't just his professionalism that defined him. He had a calm and welcoming manner that made everyone around him feel comfortable. At family lunches, he was always the one who made jokes to lighten the tense atmosphere or who helped the older ones carry heavy bags. That's why, when he met Clara, it was clear that this encounter would change their lives for good. Clara was a literature teacher who was passionate about what she did. She had a captivating energy, the kind of person who filled any environment with her presence. She loved to mix passages from literary classics into everyday conversations and made a point of sharing her optimistic view of the world. Lucas, practical and objective, saw in her spontaneity a flame that illuminated what he didn't even know was extinguished in his life. At the beginning of their relationship, they were like two teenagers rediscovering love in every simple gesture, in impromptu dinners and long conversations that went on into the early hours of the morning. They decided to get married after 3 years of dating. The ceremony was simple, but full of meaning. They both came from families that value traditions, and the wedding seemed like a natural extension of the history they had built together. Soon, a comfortable routine was established between them. Clara, always so involved with her students and literary projects, found in Lucas a safe haven, a partner willing to listen to her after long, intense days. Lucas, on the other hand, after exhausting days at work, knew that Clara's soft voice and the aroma of his favorite tea, prepared with the care that only she had, awaited him at home. The apartment they lived in was a charming blend of their personalities. In the living room, Clara's books shared space with Lucas' engineering awards. The walls were decorated with photos of trips they had taken together, a mosaic of memories that ranged from an impromptu hike on local trails to a luxurious trip to Europe that they had planned for years. There was something special about that home. It was a space that seemed to be an extension of the love they had built. But not everything was perfect. As the years progressed, small frustrations began to creep in silently. Lucas immersed himself even more in work, taking on ambitious projects that demanded not only more hours from him, but also more emotional energy. He justified the effort by thinking about the future, how that sacrifice would guarantee them stability and comfort. Clara, for her part, began to feel increasingly alone. She didn't verbalize her dissatisfaction directly, she preferred to disguise her discomfort with smiles and continued to dedicate herself to her career, but something in her began to wither. Moments of disconnection became more frequent. Lucas, although affectionate, would often come home late and collapse on the sofa, too exhausted to keep up the long conversations that had once been the basis of their relationship. Clara, on the other hand, sank into the literary world, creating an invisible barrier between them. The passion that had once been so vibrant now seemed to be overshadowed by a layer of monotony and silence. Close friends noticed the change. At dinner parties, Clara avoided talking about Lucas with the same sparkle in her eyes as before. Lucas, for his part, seemed oblivious to this reality, seeing everything as a temporary phase. "We're just busy," he justified to himself, believing that the love they felt would be enough to overcome any adversity. Despite this, there were times when the essence of the couple still shone through. On their wedding anniversaries, Lucas made a point of surprising Clara with elaborate gestures. On one anniversary, he organized a picnic in the park where she liked to read when she was younger. Clara, thrilled, held his hand while whispering that she loved him. "I love you too," Lucas replied, and for a moment it seemed that everything was as it should be. But these moments became rare, like a flame that struggled to stay lit. However, Clara began to look for new ways to fill the void she felt. She agreed to take part in more cultural events, made new friends and got involved in projects that kept her busy, but also took her further away from Lucas. She told herself she was just exploring new horizons, but deep down she knew she was looking for something she had lost in her marriage. Meanwhile, Lucas hardly noticed the changes. Involved in his work, he was convinced that he was doing the best for both of them. The intense routine meant that he didn't have time to reflect on the little warning signs. Clara's absence from home was something he attributed to her dedication to her career. He trusted her unconditionally, and perhaps this trust blinded him on some level. Clara began to be noticed by someone at one of the cultural events she attended. A man who shared her literary passions and seemed to understand her in a way that Lucas no longer did. He was charming, attentive, and Clara found herself captivated by the attention she received. At first, they were just harmless conversations, exchanging ideas about books and poetry. But over time, these interactions became more frequent, more intense. Clara knew she was stepping into dangerous territory, but she couldn't stay away. Meanwhile, Lucas began to feel an even greater disconnection. He could see that Clara was becoming more distant, but he didn't know how to approach the subject. One evening, he tried to start a conversation. "Are you all right? You seem distracted lately." Clara smiled, but it was an empty smile. "I'm just tired. Work is demanding a lot of me," she replied, looking away. Lucas wanted to believe her explanation, even though something inside him told him that there was more to that answer than she was admitting. And so they continued their lives, each following paths that, although still intertwined, seemed increasingly distant. The apartment, which had once been a reflection of their union, now seemed just a space where two people coexisted. Clara, involved in a dynamic that she herself didn't know how to control, and Lucas, trying to hold together something that was already starting to unravel. What they didn't know was that this precarious balance was about to collapse. Something bigger, something irremediable, was coming. Lucas woke up earlier than usual that morning. Something was bothering him, although he couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. The silence of the house, which had once been peaceful, seemed to be filled with something denser. He tried to push the thoughts away as he prepared for another long day at work. Clara was still asleep in the bedroom, and for a moment he stood in the doorway, watching her. Her face, relaxed by sleep, was still the same one he had fallen in love with so many years ago. But something was different, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. Clara, on the other hand, woke up with a heaviness in her chest. She had learned to disguise her emotions masterfully, but lately it seemed more difficult. There was a whirlwind inside her, a conflict that never let up. She felt guilt, but also a strange excitement about something that even she didn't fully understand. When Lucas said goodbye with a quick kiss, as he did every day, she wondered to what extent she could continue leading this double life. The following weeks brought an almost unbearable dynamic for Clara. The man she had met at the cultural event, whose name she pronounced cautiously even in thought, was now part of her routine. The encounters, which at first were casual and full of harmless conversation, began to turn into something more intimate. Clara knew she was overstepping her bounds, but she told herself that it was just an escape, a refuge from the monotony that seemed to have taken over her marriage. Lucas, although still absorbed in his projects, began to notice changes that he couldn't ignore. Clara was becoming more distant, and her gaze seemed to wander away whenever he tried to initiate deeper conversations. She spent more time away, with excuses that sounded convincing but left a hint of doubt in his mind. One evening, while she was in the shower, he noticed that her cell phone was on the table, the screen lit with a message that he couldn't help but read. It was just a short sentence, "Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow." The sender was unfamiliar, and Lucas's heart leapt. He tried to shake off the feeling that something was wrong, but doubt had been planted. Clara didn't notice that Lucas was paying more attention. She was trapped in an internal dilemma that consumed her, torn between the comfort of marriage and the adrenaline rush of a forbidden romance. Her lover, who at first seemed to be just a distraction, was beginning to demand more. He wanted more frequent encounters, he wanted Clara to commit in ways she wasn't ready for. "You're not satisfied with your life," he said during one of these encounters. "Why keep pretending?" Those words echoed in her mind for days. Meanwhile, Lucas began to investigate discreetly. He wasn't the impulsive type, so he decided he needed proof before confronting Clara. He didn't want to accuse her without certainty, but the idea that his wife might be hiding something ate away at him. He mentally revisited the last few months, trying to put together pieces that, in isolation, didn't make sense. Clara's extra work, the calls she answered away from him, the forced smiles when he tried to create a moment for the two of them. Everything was starting to fit into a pattern that he didn't want to see. One evening, while Clara was at a supposed work dinner, Lucas decided to follow her. He knew it was an extreme step, but the uncertainty was unbearable. The address she had mentioned didn't lead to a restaurant or a business meeting. It was a residential neighborhood, quiet and secluded. He parked the car a safe distance away and waited. Minutes later, he saw Clara getting out of a car he had never seen before. The man accompanying her was holding her hand intimately, and her laughter sounded like a dagger in Lucas's heart. He waited for them to enter the house before deciding what to do. His mind was conflicted. Part of him wanted to confront them right then, to demand explanations, but another part knew he wasn't ready to hear the truth. He got back in his car and drove aimlessly, trying to process what he had just witnessed. The silence of the journey was interrupted only by his chaotic thoughts. He wondered where he had gone wrong, what he had done to make Clara seek something outside of marriage. But deep down, he knew it wasn't all his fault. Clara came home late that night with a smile that disappeared when she found Lucas sitting on the sofa, waiting for her. "It's late," he said, his voice calmer than he felt. She tried to justify herself with the usual excuse, but the look on Lucas' face indicated that he knew more than she thought. "Clara, can we talk?" he asked, and the serious tone made her feel a chill run through her body. The conversation didn't happen that night. Clara shied away, claiming to be tired, and Lucas decided to wait. He needed more time, more clarity before facing what he knew was inevitable. In the days that followed, the tension between them was palpable. Lucas was more introspective, while Clara tried to act as if everything was normal, but they both knew that something had changed. The moment of revelation came unexpectedly. Lucas decided to make a surprise appearance at the restaurant where Clara said she was having another business meeting. When she entered the room, she saw him sitting at a table with the same man from the house. They were laughing, carefree, until her eyes met his. The smile disappeared instantly, replaced by an expression of pure panic. Lucas walked over to the table, each step carrying a mixture of anger and pain. Clara tried to say something, but he placed his wedding ring on the table, interrupting her. "Finish your dinner," he said, before turning his back and leaving. She called out to him, but he didn't look back. The noise around them seemed to disappear, leaving only the echo of the betrayal that was now impossible to ignore. Clara remained seated, motionless, while her lover muttered something she couldn't even hear. Her mind was in chaos, and the weight of the choices she had made finally seemed to fall on her shoulders. Lucas, outside, was taking deep breaths, trying to find the strength to face what was coming next. The most difficult chapter of his life had only just begun. Lucas felt the world spinning around him. The silence of his car parked in the garage was broken only by the sound of his heavy breathing. The images of Clara laughing next to her lover were still etched in his mind. He had left his wedding ring on the table, but it seemed that a piece of himself had been left there too, exposed, vulnerable. As much as the betrayal was a devastating blow, something inside him told him that there was still more hidden. He didn't know what it was, but he could feel it. The house was dark when he entered. Clara still hadn't returned. The space that had once been his home now seemed cold and distant, as if it reflected the emptiness he felt inside. He sat on the sofa, staring at the wall, searching for some kind of answer in the silence. When he heard the sound of the key in the door, his heart raced. Clara entered hesitantly, her posture revealing her nervousness. She knew that a confrontation was inevitable. "Lucas, can we talk?" Her voice came out low, almost a whisper. He stared at her, his eyes carrying a mixture of anger and pain that she couldn't ignore. "Talk, then," he said with a calm that seemed more threatening than any shout. Clara hesitated, searching for the right words to start with. "I know what I did was unforgivable. I know I hurt you in a way I never imagined I could," her voice faltered, but Lucas didn't respond, waiting for her to continue. "But I want you to know that doesn't mean I don't love you. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake." Lucas laughed, but it was a bitter laugh, without any humor. "A mistake? Clara, a mistake is forgetting to pay a bill. What you've done is destroy everything we've built together." Clara lowered her head, tears filling her eyes. "I know. And I don't expect you to forgive me, but there's something you need to know. Something that might help you understand." She hesitated, as if afraid of the words she was about to say. "The man you saw me with today, he's not just someone I met by chance." Lucas frowned. "What are you trying to say? Get to the point, Clara." She took a deep breath before answering. He's part of my past. Before I met you, we had something. And I never told you because I thought it would never come up again. But he reappeared. And I let him into my life again." Lucas felt the weight of her words like a punch in the gut. "So you knew who he was all along. Yet you chose." He interrupted himself, unable to finish the sentence. "You chose to cheat on me with him." Clara nodded, her tears now falling freely. "It was a mistake, Lucas, a mistake I should never have made. But he didn't reappear by chance. He came after me." Lucas leaned forward, his eyes fixed on hers, trying to decipher what was being said. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, as if struggling to find the necessary courage. He has something against me. Something that, if revealed, would destroy more than just our marriage." Lucas remained silent, trying to process what he had just heard. "And what would that be, Clara? What is it about him that is so important that you would rather betray me than be honest with me?" Clara swallowed, her expression reflecting her internal conflict. "It's something that happened many years ago, before us. I did something I'm not proud of, something I thought I'd left in the past. But he knows. And he's blackmailing me." Lucas blinked, surprised. "Blackmail? Is that what this is about? Are you saying that what you did to me was to protect some dark secret?" Clara nodded, unable to find the words to explain fully. "I know it sounds terrible. And it is terrible. But I was scared, Lucas. I thought I could handle it on my own, that I could keep everything under control. Lucas stood up, unable to remain seated. He paced back and forth, trying to organize his thoughts. And what is this secret, Clara? What's so bad that you'd rather deceive me than tell me the truth? She hesitated again, her lips trembling. I don't know if I can tell you. But you deserve to know. Then tell me, Lucas demanded, his patience wearing thin. Clara took a deep breath, her voice almost a whisper when she finally spoke. I stole money from him, many years ago. It was something impulsive, a mistake from my youth. I was desperate, needing money to help my mother who was ill. He was my boss at the time, and I took something that wasn't mine. Lucas blinked, trying to absorb the revelation. Are you telling me that all this happened because you stole money from him in the past? And now he's using you? Clara nodded, tears falling again. I had no way of paying him back then. And he never forgave me. When we met again, he said I had to make it up to him, one way or another. Lucas was silent for a long time, trying to put together the pieces of the puzzle that Clara had put in front of him. The weight of what she had revealed was overwhelming, but the betrayal still burned stronger. He stared at her, his gaze full of conflicting emotions. And you thought that was the solution? To betray the man who had been by your side all these years? Clara couldn't answer, she just sobbed, her shame evident. Lucas took a deep breath, trying to contain the anger and pain that threatened to overflow. He knew there was more to be said, more that needed to be confronted. But at that moment, all he felt was the crushing weight of a truth that changed everything. Lucas remained standing, as still as a statue. Clara's words echoed in his mind, each one adding to the weight he felt in his chest. The silence between them was cutting, but Clara had no more tears to shed. Lucas closed his eyes for a moment, as if trying to find some strength within himself to continue the conversation. I need to get out of here, he finally said, his voice hoarse with emotional exhaustion. Lucas, please, Clara took a step towards him, but he held up his hand, asking her to stop. I just want you to listen to me. Listen to what, Clara? He opened his eyes and stared at her with an intensity that made her flinch. You destroyed me. All this, years of trust, years of sacrifice, thrown away because you decided you couldn't tell me the truth. Because you thought dealing with it alone was better than being partners. Clara felt a knot forming in her throat. I was afraid, Lucas. Afraid of losing you, afraid that you would see me as someone imperfect, dirty. Lucas laughed, but there was no humor in his laugh. Imperfections? We all have them, Clara. But betrayal? Lies? That's not an imperfection. That's a choice. You made that choice. I thought I was protecting you, Clara tried to justify, but her voice weakened. Protecting? Lucas repeated, incredulous. He took a step towards her, his face just a few centimeters from hers. You didn't protect me. You destroyed me. You left me out of it all, as if I were just a disposable part of your life. She wanted to reply, but the words wouldn't come. She knew he was right. Lucas took a deep breath, stepping back and picking up his coat, which was hanging on the back of the chair. Where are you going? Clara asked, her voice desperate. I don't know, he replied, his eyes fixed on the door. I just know I can't stay here. Lucas left, slamming the door behind him. The sound echoed through the house, leaving Clara alone with her thoughts and overwhelming guilt. She collapsed on the sofa, trying to understand how everything had come to this. As he walked through the city streets, Lucas felt the cold night air hit his face. He had no destination, he just needed movement, something to take his mind off the heaviness he felt. He passed bars, thought about going inside, but knew that the alcohol would only increase the turmoil inside him. Instead, he found himself in an empty park, where he sat down on a bench and finally allowed the tears he was holding back to fall. Hours passed before he got up and decided to go home. When he entered, he found Clara still sitting on the sofa, her hands folded in her lap, as if she had been waiting for him all along. "I haven't slept," she said, without raising her eyes to him. "Neither have I," Lucas replied, his voice tired. Clara finally faced him, her eyes red from crying. "Lucas, I know that nothing I say will change what happened. But you need to understand that I never wanted things to come to this. I made a mistake, but it wasn't because I didn't love you. It was out of desperation." Lucas pulled out a chair and sat down in front of her. "Desperation is not an excuse to destroy someone's life. You knew you could trust me. You knew that if you told me the truth, I would stand by you. But instead, you chose to lie." "I know," Clara replied, her voice full of regret. "I know I ruined everything, but what he was doing. He wouldn't stop, Lucas. He wanted to destroy me, and I did the only thing I thought could stop it." "What now?" Lucas asked, his voice firm. "What do you think will happen now?" Clara lowered her head. "I don't know." "I know," Lucas said, standing up suddenly. "You're going to tell me everything. Absolutely everything. Because I'm not going to carry this baggage alone. You put me in this position, Clara. Now it's your turn to deal with the consequences." She nodded, knowing she was out of options. Lucas took out his phone and did something that surprised Clara. He called her lover. Clara tried to stop him, but he ignored her. "Do you want to sort this out, Clara? Then let's do it." Lucas waited for the man to answer. "I need to talk to you. Now." The conversation was short, but effective. Shortly afterwards, the three of them were sitting in the same room that, until recently, had been home to Lucas and Clara. The lover looked uncomfortable, but tried to keep his posture. Lucas, on the other hand, was calm, but there was something about his calm that was frightening. "Speak," Lucas said, looking directly at him. "I want to hear it from you." The man hesitated, but in front of Lucas' gaze and the heavy silence of the room, he began to speak. He told about the money, about Clara's past and how he had used it to infiltrate her life again. He tried to justify his actions, saying that he only wanted what was rightfully his, but Lucas interrupted. "And that includes destroying a marriage? Does it include playing with someone else's life?" Lucas stood up, approaching him. "You're pathetic." The lover tried to reply, but Lucas didn't give him any space. He turned to Clara. "And what about you? Did you think giving in to his demands would solve anything? That he would just go away?" Clara had no answers. She stared at the floor, defeated. Lucas took a step back, looking at the two of them. "I'm leaving," he finally said. "This house, this marriage, none of it means anything to me anymore." Clara stood up quickly. "Lucas, please don't. I know I made a mistake, but don't throw it all away. We can get through this." He stared at her, and for a moment, Clara thought he might reconsider. But then he shook his head. "You threw it all away, Clara. It wasn't me. I'm just following on from what you started." Lucas picked up his things and left, leaving Clara and her lover sitting in silence. The door closed, and the sound echoed through the house, marking the end of something that had once been so full of promise. The door closed with a bang that reverberated through the corridors of the house, leaving Clara in almost absolute silence, interrupted only by the irregular breathing of the man who was still in the room. She stood motionless, staring at the empty space where Lucas had been moments before, unable to fully process what had just happened. As much as she had expected things to spiral out of control, the way everything fell apart was more devastating than she could have predicted. "What now?" her lover asked, his voice low and hesitant, as if he didn't know whether to speak. Clara was slow to answer. Her mind was in chaos, trying to absorb the weight of Lucas' words and the inevitable conclusion they represented. "You have to go," she finally said, without even looking at him. Her voice was dry, without any trace of the passion that had once united them. He hesitated, as if he wanted to argue, but her tone allowed for no argument. I said go. Now. He left in silence, leaving Clara alone in the house that now seemed a stranger to her. Every object seemed charged with memories, not only of happy times, but also of the last few days of unbearable tension. The sofa where Lucas sat to watch television, the cups of coffee they shared on Sunday mornings, everything seemed to pulsate with a pain that Clara didn't know how to deal with. Meanwhile, Lucas drove aimlessly. The night was cold, but he felt nothing but the heat of his own anger and despair. Every kilometer he drove seemed to take him further away from everything he knew, but the relief he hoped for didn't come. He parked in a deserted street and let his head fall on the steering wheel, his heavy breathing filling the silence of the car. Slowly, the anger began to give way to sadness. Not ordinary sadness, but something deep, rooted in the realization that his life as he knew it was over. Clara's betrayal was a blow, but what really devastated him was the realization that everything they had built together seemed to have been based on something too fragile to stand the test of time. He closed his eyes, trying to find some memory that could ease the pain, but every memory seemed contaminated now, tainted by the shadow of what had happened. Clara, alone in the house, finally managed to move. She went into the bedroom and looked at the bed she had shared with Lucas for so many years. She sat on the edge, holding in her hands the wedding ring he had left on the table in the restaurant. The cold metal seemed to weigh a ton in her hands, as if it symbolized the weight of her choices. "What have I done?" she muttered to herself, her voice breaking into sobs. In the days that followed, they both tried, in different ways, to find some sense in the chaos. Lucas, who had moved into a small temporary apartment, threw himself into work as a way of escaping the thoughts that insisted on chasing him. But even physical exhaustion wasn't enough to silence the pain he felt. During a break at work, he picked up his phone and opened the photo gallery. There were pictures of Clara, smiling next to him on trips, celebrations, moments that once seemed eternal. He almost deleted them all, but hesitated. Part of him wasn't ready to leave it all behind. Clara, on the other hand, plunged into a desperate attempt to fix what she could. She called Lucas countless times, but he never picked up. She left messages, wrote letters, tried in every way to explain, to ask for forgiveness, but all she got was silence. Each failed attempt made her feel more isolated, more aware of the irreparable damage she had caused. She also began to face the social consequences of her actions. Friends who had once been close began to drift away, their messages being ignored or answered coldly. Even at work, Clara felt the judgmental stares of colleagues who seemed to know more than she would have liked. Her lover, on the other hand, disappeared completely, as if he had never existed. He had gotten what he wanted and had no interest in remaining in her life. Lucas, in an attempt to regain control over his own narrative, began to open up to a close friend, someone he had known since his youth. Sitting in a quiet bar, he finally got it off his chest. "I don't know how to move on," he admitted, his voice low and laden with emotion. His friend, who had listened patiently, put his hand on Lucas' shoulder. "You don't need to know now. Just keep walking. The pain won't go away anytime soon, but you'll learn to live with it. And one day, maybe, you'll find something that makes you feel alive again." The words echoed in Lucas' mind as he walked back to his apartment that night. He wasn't sure he believed them, but he wanted to. He wanted to believe that there was something beyond that pain, that he could find some kind of redemption or even happiness again. Clara, on the other hand, was in a different process. She knew she needed to face the truth of her actions, not only to try to get Lucas back, but also to understand herself. In a moment of courage, she decided to seek professional help, someone who could help her unravel the reasons behind her choices. During the first session, she heard herself saying things she had never admitted, not even to herself. "I was always afraid of not being enough," she confessed. "With Lucas, everything seemed so perfect that I thought that one day he would realize that I didn't deserve it. Then, when the past came back, it was as if it was easier to destroy everything than to risk being destroyed." The words hung in the air, and Clara realized that this was the beginning of something. Not a quick cure, but a journey to understand who she was and how she could someday find peace with herself. Lucas, on a day off, decided to walk through the park where he had been with Clara so many times. He sat on a bench and observed the people around him, children playing, couples walking hand in hand, elderly people sharing moments of silent complicity. He wondered if he would ever be able to experience that again, if he could trust someone as he had trusted Clara. The answer didn't come immediately, but as he watched the sun begin to set, Lucas felt something he hadn't felt for weeks, a small, almost imperceptible spark of hope. He didn't know what the future held, but he was willing to take it one step at a time. And maybe that would be enough to start. Months had passed since Lucas and Clara last spoke to each other. The silence between them seemed definitive, a chasm that neither of them knew how to cross. Lucas had moved permanently into a new apartment, a small, functional space that reflected his current state of mind. He lived simply, focusing on rebuilding his routine without a trace of Clara. Clara, on the other hand, was still in the house where the two of them had lived together for so many years. Every corner of the place reminded her of Lucas, of what they had, and of what she had destroyed. The therapy process had begun to bring answers to the questions she had never had the courage to ask herself. But with the answers came pain. The realization that her insecurity and wrong choices had led her to lose the man she considered the love of her life. Lucas, on an afternoon off, decided to open the box he had kept with him since his move. Inside were objects he hadn't had the heart to discard, old letters, travel photos, small gifts Clara had given him over the years. He looked at each item, allowing himself to feel the pain and nostalgia that came with them. It was strange how those memories, while hurting him, also seemed to warm his heart. Meanwhile, Clara continued to look for ways to deal with the consequences. In a gesture of courage, she decided to seek out her lover and confront him about what he had done. She didn't want reconciliation, but she felt she needed to close that chapter once and for all. When she met him, she realized that he was no longer the man who made her feel special, he was just someone who had taken advantage of her weaknesses. "You've destroyed more than you know," Clara said, her voice firm but not angry. "And I'm not just talking about me. I'm talking about a person I loved, the life we had, everything you manipulated to feel in control." The man tried to justify himself, but Clara interrupted him. "I don't want your apology. I just want you to know that, despite everything, I've rebuilt myself. And what about you? What's left for you?" Her words hung in the air, and he remained silent, unable to answer. Clara got up and left, feeling lighter than she had in months. That conversation didn't erase what had happened, but it ended the cycle of guilt and submission that had trapped her for so long. Lucas, for his part, began to open up to new experiences. He had met someone, a work colleague who shared his passion for architecture. Their encounters were casual, but full of meaningful conversations that began to rekindle something he thought was lost, the ability to trust. She wasn't like Clara, and perhaps that was exactly what he needed. One afternoon, while walking through a park, Lucas spotted Clara in the distance. She was sitting on a bench, alone, looking at the horizon. For a moment, he thought about going on his way, but something stopped him. He hesitantly approached her and stopped a few meters away. "Can I sit down?" he asked, his voice calm but emotionless. Clara looked up, surprised, but nodded. "Of course." The two remained silent for a while, until Clara spoke. "You look well." Lucas shrugged. "I'm trying." "And you?" "Better than I was," she replied, without looking away. "I think I've finally started to understand things. It took a while, but I'm learning." Lucas remained silent, processing her words. He no longer felt anger, but neither did he feel the love that had once dominated his heart. What remained was a quiet acceptance that some things couldn't be fixed. "I just wanted you to know," Clara continued, "that it was never your fault. I destroyed everything on my own, and you didn't deserve any of it." "I'm sorry, Lucas." I really am. Lucas nodded, but didn't reply immediately. He looked at Clara, seeing in her not the woman who had betrayed him, but someone who was trying to make amends. Finally, he said, I hope you find peace, Clara. I really do. Clara smiled, a sad but sincere smile. And I hope you'll be happy, Lucas. More than anything, you deserve it. They said goodbye there, with no drama, no promises of reconciliation. Just two people who had accepted that their time together was over. Clara continued her walk through the park, while Lucas went back to his new life. Months later, Lucas felt he was ready to take a new step. His co-worker had become more than just a friend. He invited her to his apartment for a simple but meaningful dinner. Over dinner, he realized that, for the first time in a long time, he was genuinely happy. It wasn't the effusive happiness of the past, but a tranquility that filled him in a way he had never experienced before. Clara, on the other hand, dedicated herself to projects that reconnected her with who she really was. She started a community literature campaign, helping young people to find their voices through writing. She knew she couldn't erase the past, but she could use her experiences to create something positive. Her lover, without the same emotional resources, saw his life collapse. The truth about his manipulation eventually came out, and he lost his job, as well as many of his relationships. He was left alone, dealing with the consequences of his selfish choices. In the end, they all went their separate ways, but each of them carried the marks of what had happened. Lucas found the ability to love again, Clara found redemption by turning her pain into something meaningful, and the lover faced the consequences of his actions. The story had no winners, but it had an outcome that reflected everyone's choices. What did you think of this story? Leave your opinion in the comments and tell us what you would do in Lucas or Clara's place. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Here, we never support betrayal, but we do believe in exploring its consequences and lessons. See you next time.